Finally, we've returned to Kirby Super Star Ultra. This episode is bringing together a lot of what we've been doing since the beginning of April. 2 weeks ago, we sat down to look over the events of Spring Breeze and Revenge of the King, two of the sub-games in the Super Star Ultra collection. Last week, we discussed Knightmare and Dreamland, and a lot of lore surrounding the Fountain of Dreams, which will become very relevant in this episode. We'll be rapid-firing our way through a fair few games today, so this video may be a little longer than most. In fact, it's probably going to take longer to watch this video than to actually play through Spring Breeze. Actually, let's try that. Spring Breeze will be in the top right corner of this video as we go. And go! Dyna Blade is the second game available and doesn't have a lot of direct ties to Dreamland. This game features Kirby fighting against the gigantic bird Dyna Blade, who's been stealing food and destroying crops all around Dreamland. Once again, Kirby battles their way across Dreamland until they find the great bird atop Candy Mountain. The two clash in battle, and the Pink Terror pulls out the win, heavily injuring Dyna Blade. However, when the battle is finished, Kirby discovers that Dyna Blade is a mother who's only been stealing food in order to feed her chicks. Feeling bad for what they've done, Kirby cared for and raised the babies while Dyna Blade healed from their battle, before the bird family took off across the sea, to a place where they could live without harming others, indebted and grateful to Kirby for the help. Not much really ties this game into its predecessors, but the fact that the Meta Knights appear and see Kirby immediately as a threat probably means they've faced each other before, placing this game after Knightmare and Dreamland. Gourmet Race is a racing-themed Kirby mode that sees Dedede tauntingly challenge Kirby to a race across Dreamland, seeing who can run fastest while eating the most, which is probably the most Kirby competition you could ever find. Kirby, of course, wins handily, putting another loss under a humiliated King Dedede's belt. There isn't much to this one other than the Kirby-Dedede rivalry. Generally just based on where it is in the list, I will place it after Dyna Blade. Though for reasons we'll get into later, if I could see any games being moved to another location on the timeline, it would be this one, but for now I don't see a reason to do that. This game features Kirby exploring a great underground network of caves that are much more than meet the eye. The main story of it is rather simple. While on a picnic, Kirby falls down a long shaft into this cave and explores it, collecting many treasures and defeating its guardians. The cave is full of ruins from some ancient civilization that may have once lived there. There really isn't much of an active storyline at all beyond that, and large swaths of the game are entirely optional, but there's still a lot of interesting things to talk about. Included among the treasures are multiple items that you wouldn't expect to find in the Kirby universe. The Triforce, a Mr. Saturn, the Screw Attack, a Phantom Mask, the Wario Bucket, a DK Barrel, Captain Falcon's helmet, the Falchion, a Mario Kart tire, and Palutina's sacred treasures. Not only that, but it features a ton of items from around the rest of the Kirby series. You may write these off just as Easter eggs, and generally I would too, but there's one more element I have yet to bring up: the cave itself. In the Japanese manual, the cave is called Majorut, which translates to the place where many places mingle together. We can view all these items as just Easter eggs, but the cave naming makes their inclusion feel much more intentional. That said, some of these aren't exactly the genuine objects themselves. There's no way this is the actual Triforce just sitting around in Dreamland, for example, but its inclusion still shows a connection to the world of Zelda. Maybe it was a relief created by whatever civilization left the ruins in these caves. I want to do a full video about these connections at some point in the future, but I don't think I'm quite at that point. Right now, I just want to leave this open, get your opinions on this, and see what you folks create from these points. There are two bosses within the subgame that are worth discussing. The first of these is Computer Virus, which acts as a reference to classic JRPGs, most notably Dragon Quest. Outside being a really cool boss fight, one has to ask the question: how does a computer virus affect Kirby's world? It doesn't appear to be on a screen of any kind. When the virus is destroyed, the windows close to reveal nothing behind them. It's like the virus had taken hold in the fabric of reality itself. So the question stands: what exactly was this virus infecting? One theory goes that, even within the universes of these games, they are still, in fact, video games. That may seem obvious to us, but I'm saying that deeply within the lore of these games, they are fictional creations. This is further supported by games like Pokemon, where where the Game Freak staff exist in games like gods, blatantly stating that they created the video game you're playing. Fire Emblem Heroes also makes references to real-world events like Choose Your Legends having an effect on their world. There are a lot of Easter eggs like this within the circle of franchises that I'm looking into that seem to point in this direction, and it's something that I probably will do another video about at some point in the future. Another option is that the virus is infecting the ancient technology that allowed for the connection between universes. Crystals seem to be very important in this game, and with the boss we'll discuss in a moment being explicitly linked to them. So this connection, and the virus's appearance in the crystal area, seem notable. But yes, in case these last few points weren't clear, I do plan on, in the long run, discussing the overarching multiverse that is implied by franchises like Fire Emblem, Xenoblade, and Super Smash Bros. Discovering how the Nintendo multiverse works is one of the end goals of the Deepest Lore series. We're finally getting to a point where we can start dipping our toes into that. The other boss of note is Wham Bam Rock. Wham Bam is a living embodiment of rock that serves as the final boss to this subgame, acting as its last and most powerful guardian. All you see of him is a pair of disembodied hands and a floating face in the background. This is once again a recurring type of boss for Nintendo games. However, to anyone who's played Super Smash Bros., his moveset may seem a little familiar. There are a lot of similarities that can and have been drawn between Wham Bam and Master Hand. This is likely because both were introduced in games directed by the same man, Masahiro Sakurai. Undoubtedly, out of universe, there was a lot of influence on the creation of Master Hand based on Wham Bam Rock. Interestingly enough, the hands themselves actually do appear as bosses in Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, another game which involves Kirby traveling between different dimensions. There's definitely something worth exploring here, but I'm going to put that off a little longer as well. The other notable thing about Wham Bam Rock is that this isn't even his final form. While I don't foresee a time or place where Helper to Hero or the True Arena could be a set of events that unfold, both of these subgames feature the addition of Wham Bam Jewel, a more powerful version of Wham Bam Rock, referred to as the Wham Bam King. It looks much more similar to his appearance in the original Superstar. I've seen some people refer to Jewel as the crazy hand in Rock's Master Hand, and I can see the comparison based on his movements during the battle. Looking at the timeline, despite its importance to the multiverse, this game doesn't really tie into much else in the Kirby series. There's no sign of Dedede, no Meta Knight, and the entire game is underground, so we can't even get a good shot of the moon. Due to the reuse of bosses, I feel like placing it before Milky Way Wishes is the way to go. So I guess for the moment, I'll simply place it between Gourmet Race and... Finally, the monster of Brawl has arrived in Super Star Ultra. This game features the titular Meta Knight as the main antagonist, looking to conquer Dreamland in order to improve their lazy lifestyle. A majority of this game takes place aboard his warship, the Halberd, as Kirby races to stop it before Meta Knight can use its immense power to take over. I've seen people decry this game as being out of character for the Masked Swordsman, and I can definitely understand that. While Meta Knight is in many ways a rival to Kirby, he's rarely a straight-up antagonistic force in the way that Dedede is. The best theory I've seen is that, somehow, he'd foreseen the events of the Dark Matter trilogy, and was making sure Dreamland was ready for what was to come. Either through training up Kirby, much like he did in Knightmare and Dreamland, or by taking control of the nation himself and whipping it into shape if Kirby were to fail. Unfortunately, his motives are very rarely explained throughout the series, so we may never know for sure. But the fact that he offered Kirby a sword seems to imply that it's more than just a lust for power. Outside featuring the Knights and the Star Warrior, the game also introduces us to the Heavy Lobster, a mechanical beast that serves as the guardian of the ship. We don't know much about it, but we'll learn more about it in later subgames. Notably, when Kirby gets knocked off the Halberd early in the game, he's dropped into Orange Ocean. This is the name of one of the worlds in Knightmare and Dreamland, and was the location where Meta Knight was actually fought. Since this was so soon after the Halberd took off, it's likely that Orange Ocean is actually Meta Knight's main base of operations. This goes on to be heavily implied again come Kirby's Squeak Squad, but we'll discuss that when we come to it. In the end, as expected, Kirby is able to force the Halberd to crash into the ocean. One thing I find both sweet and heartbreaking about this game is how loyal Meta Knight's inferiors are to him, even those with very little combat potential. They are willing to go to their own deaths rather than escape when Meta Knight commands them to. This exchange shows both how much he cares for his soldiers and how much trust those soldiers put in him. It really says a lot about Meta Knight as a character. Also, we actually see a returning character from a previous subgame here, as Dyna Blade helped Kirby return to the halberd after they'd been knocked to the ground. It's worth mentioning that Revenge of the King, which we covered back in Spring Breeze, is actually heavily referential to this side game, including a similar title, a mirror match with the title antagonist, and at the end of Revenge of the King, a version of the D2D theme is played in the style of the Meta Knight's theme. It's clear that HAL wanted us as players to connect these subgames. For now, I'll just continue the trend and place Revenge of the King after the Great Cave Offensive. Oh, and look, we just finished Spring Breeze. That took us all of, 10 minutes? Moving on. And here we are, this is it. Milky Way Wishes was the original climax to Superstar on the SNES. This final story took elements from all the previous games in the collection in order to create one of the most iconic stories and villains in the entire Kirby series. In this story, the Sun and the Moon around the planet Popstar are in constant battle. Day and night are switching by the moment, and it's clear that the natural order of things has been affected. Eventually, Kirby is approached by a jester named Marx, who suggests that Kirby track down an ancient being known as the Galactic Nova, who grants wishes, and ask for the Nova to fix this cosmic imbalance. This sounds like a fine idea to Kirby, and the two set off into space to find the Nova and have their wishes be answered. The Nova was actually built by an ancient civilization that's mentioned a few times in the Kirby lore, but not much is really known about them. The exact number of Nova is unclear as well. It is implied by the English localization that there are multiple, but the Japanese seems to be a little more vague on this matter. I still need to do more research into this, but if any of you have more insight than I do, especially any native Japanese speakers out there, that would be phenomenal. To awaken the Nova, they need to track down the green fountains from the various other planets in the solar system and gather star power from them, starting with Popstar. Only with all this power combined together can they summon this ancient colossus. Along the way, keen-eyed observers may notice a lot of very familiar bosses. In fact, every non-final boss for the mode has been featured in some other game in the collection. While this serves as a symbolic wrap-up of the original Superstar, it also asks us to question the roots of these bosses. Are any of them the same being on a different planet? I'd say probably not to most of them, with the exception of possibly the computer virus. Do these bosses have celestial origins? Well, Kirby is implied to have them, so it wouldn't be a surprise. This is implied more heavily by the heavy lobster fight on Makai, which takes place in a large factory that is actively producing heavy lobsters. So without a question, that is the source of the one used by Meta Knight in his subgame. Interestingly, the Meta Knights also feature as mini-bosses in this game, though they're differently colored than the ones we've seen elsewhere. This implies a celestial origin to Meta Knight and his soldiers as well, though that revelation probably doesn't come as a shock to anyone. Anyways, with the star power collected from all 8 planets, including Popstar, Kirby and Marx travel to the edge of the galaxy, where they're able to summon the Nova. However, before Kirby has time to make their wish, Marx jumps in and makes his own. He wishes to rule planet Popstar. Indeed, all of this had been a ruse from the start. He had been the one who tricked the Sun and the Moon into fighting. Also, he could come here and gain unlimited power. Granting his wish, the Nova turned Marx into a huge, bat-like monstrosity, and the Nova sped in the direction of Popstar in order to answer its master's wish. Fortunately, the Sun and Moon realized what was happening and were together able to hold off the Nova until Kirby could destroy its core using a starship made of the remaining star energy. With Nova out of commission, Kirby only had one more target remaining, Marx himself. The two of them did battle on what looks like Popstar's moon again. This background really does look similar to the final boss fight for Knightmare in Dreamland. But it is here where Marx has his downfall. He's knocked into the dormant Nova. While in the original ending this appears to have killed Marx, in the true arena it's shown that his soul was resurrected by absorbing the Nova's remaining power in order to bring back his evil soul. And Kirby once more has to battle him as this truly monstrous creature. But he is able to defeat it, and peace finally returns to Dreamland. With day and night returned to how they were meant to be, our hero was finally able to settle in for a much-deserved nap. Not only was beating every previous game necessary to unlock Milky Way Wishes in every version of Superstar, but also Milky Way Wishes was clearly designed as a finale to the collection. As such, I feel like I can safely place it at the end of our current timeline. While talking about Milky Way Wishes, I received some feedback on the previous videos that I wanted to discuss here. Props to Magma from Project Marioverse for being willing to read my scripts and give some extra input on them. You've been very helpful. One thing they mentioned to me was that in Superstar Ultra, some continuity is actually implied between Revenge of the King and Milky Way Wishes in regards to the starship. I'll go ahead and put the text for both of those boss battles on the screen now. The wording of a starship in Milky Way Wishes implies this to be a non-specific ship, while the wording in Revenge of the King calls it the starship, reflecting some familiarity with the craft. After running this by a friend of mine who knows Japanese and finding the original text, he determined that such continuity was not actually implied in the Japanese version, as articles like A and the aren't explicit in Japanese like they are in English. So, while an interesting find, I'm going to dismiss it for now. Anyone who wants to argue the point more, however, are welcome to do so. With that, we've covered every sub-game in the original Superstar. We also mentioned the extra canon inclusions from the Arena, True Arena, and Helper to Hero, and covered Revenge of the King in a previous video. That only means we have one sub-game left to discuss, and it's a bit of a weird one. While I wrote off the original Meta Knightmare in Knightmare in Dreamland as not having any worth as far as canonicity goes, Meta Knightmare Ultra tells a different story. Literally. While it's a repeat of the same stages that Kirby had to travel through in the original Superstar, it's expanded on slightly more. Meta Knight wants to become the greatest warrior in the universe. To reach that goal, he follows the path of the one who defeated him twice, Kirby. A path that ends with summoning the Galactic Nova. This appears to be the one that was shown in Milky Way Wishes, as it has fewer parts and has clearly been damaged. When he reaches it, Meta Knight asks for a chance to face down the greatest warrior in the galaxy. The Nova abides by this wish, summoning forth an ancient warrior whose power had been so great that they had been sealed away, Galactonite. The two did glorious combat, and Meta Knight prevailed, proving once and for all that he was the strongest warrior in the galaxy. All that said, the question still stands. What of this, if anything, is actually canon? Well, some of these events don't quite make sense to me. Namely, Meta Knight rebuilding the halberd just to tear it down again. Interestingly though, unlike in the Meta Knightmare mode of Knightmare in Dreamland, Meta Knight doesn't actually fight another version of himself. So that actually does leave room open for this to still happen. Honestly, I could see people taking it either way. Galactonite, while only appearing in this subgame, is most assuredly a being that exists in Kirby's universe. He appears more in future games, with a more fleshed out backstory tied into the deepest lore of this universe. Even if the events of Meta Knightmare Ultra did not occur, establishing this character is important enough to warrant discussion. Interestingly enough, a lot of similarities can be drawn between these two knights. Not only do they wear similar armor and have similar names, but Galacta's moveset is very similar to Meta Knight's, and the Ancient Warrior even has his own set of minions that are clear parallels to the Meta Knight's. If you want to count it as canon, then it has to take place after Milky Way Wishes, though I wouldn't blame you if you think otherwise. Also, this subgame establishes a narrative to the rest of Superstar. It shows a clear path from Spring Breeze to Dyna Blade to the Great Cave Offensive to Revenge of Meta Knight to Milky Way Wishes. When I mentioned that Gourmet Race could move elsewhere earlier, this is the reason why, if they skipped the maps for this game in Meta Knightmare Ultra, since there's no way Knightmare in Dreamland took place before Spring Breeze or after Revenge of Meta Knight or Milky Way Wishes. All the game mode establishes is the order of these specific games. Honestly, Great Cave Offensive and Gourmet Race could go on either side of Revenge of the King and Knightmare in Dreamland. Nothing explicitly ties those subgames into other titles outside Superstar. We just know how these titles relate to each other. And that's the end of Kirby Super Star Ultra. This is my favorite game in the Kirby series, and I know that sentiment is shared by many people. The original Superstar is available on the Wii U Virtual Console as well as Nintendo Switch Online, but unfortunately, Superstar Ultra is stuck to the used game market. While Superstar Ultra is over, Kirby Month is not, though next week's game isn't as hard of a hitter as the last few videos we've covered. It'll be a quick glance at the oft-forgotten Kirby's Pinball Land. Until next time.